You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 8th of January 2025 on Monocle Radio. Hello and a warm welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Emma Nelson, and coming up on today's programme.
Well, we need Greenland for national security purposes. You look outside, you have China ships all over the place. You have Russian ships all over the place. We're not letting that happen.
Donald Trump wants Greenland and he's prepared to use force. We'll examine whether this is hot air or a real threat. Also ahead in the next 30 minutes, why, after only a year, are Poles tiring of Prime Minister Donald Tusk? Plus,
before today's proliferation of luxury, we were the all-seeing, all-knowing, all-encompassing international brand, and anything that happened anywhere probably happened at a Hilton.
We hear how major luxury hotel brands mark themselves apart in today's crowded market. All that right here on The Briefing with me, Emma Nelson. Less than 2 weeks before his inauguration, the US President-elect Donald Trump has repeated his desire to take control of both Greenland and the Panama Canal. He even floated the possibility of using military force. Meanwhile, his son Donald Trump Jr. was in Greenland on what he described as a personal day trip to talk to people. Well, to find out what this is all about and to get the world's reaction, I'm joined now by Ilgin Karladag. He's a journalist based in Sweden, based in Malmö. A very good afternoon to you, Ilgin.
Good afternoon to you.
Can we say that this is perhaps a foretaste of 4 very unpredictable years of wild press conferences, or is there a credible threat behind this?
Well, the fact that Trump is speaking so fiercely about his ambition to buy Greenland even before his second inauguration shows the self-governing island is a high priority for the incoming Trump administration. When he first suggested buying Greenland in 2019, he was ridiculed, but this time we can expect a much more forceful president, even towards his allies. No, he's even threatened to tariff Denmark at a high level if it stands in the way of a Greenland. So this shows that it will be quite wild in the next couple of years and quite forceful.
And how have the Danes responded to this?
Well, the Danes, as I said, when he first mentioned it in 2019, the Danish Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, she called the proposal absurd. But this time, she's been strikingly restrained. She said there's reason to be pleased with the growing interest from the US, which is a close ally. But she also said that Greenland is for the Greenlanders. And in terms of Greenlandic reaction, their long-standing dream is to ensure their own prosperity, security, and independence. But they've repeatedly said they are not for sale because their dream is to become independent and to build their own economy, which they at the moment cannot because they rely on annual subsidies from Denmark. But they are open to dialogue. They've even said, the Greenlandic politician Erik Jensen, he said, we must exploit the interests that other nations have for our country. So even if they reiterate that they're not for sale, they are open for dialogue.
The fact is that they're saying that they are open for dialogue suggests that perhaps that they, like you, think that Donald Trump won't just drop this like a hot potato and move on to the next subject as soon as he gets into office. But this is something that not just Greenland and Denmark, but the rest of the world needs to start to consider, which is a more destabilized world with Donald Trump at the helm of Washington.
Well, there's a few things to really discuss here is that the US military presence in Greenland is very powerful. So it's not like there's no US presence there already. Second, Greenland is incredibly rich in natural resources. They have raw materials that can be used to build technology. They just need to tap into it. So it's very clear that Danish analysts are not convinced that this is about security and protecting the free world. They think that Donald Trump is after Greenland's natural resources. He wants it because it's a wealthy nation that has potential. Denmark has much more to lose in angering Donald Trump over tariffs. And then Greenland is more self-governing than one would think. Greenland has power over its courts, its police, its immigration. It even has the right to ask for a referendum on independence if Denmark, of course, agrees to it. So there are lots of nuances that needs to be discussed.
We have this connection to the European Union, but don't we, with Greenland being an autonomous territory within Denmark, which of course is part of the European Union. And France's foreign minister has stepped in today by saying that the EU will not allow any country to attack its sovereign borders. This does what in terms of offering a protective sort of barrier in some ways, or some sort of protection to Denmark and the Greenland with this?
Yes, I mean, it's as I said earlier, it's so Denmark basically has power over foreign policy and defense over Greenland. Greenland is self-governing, but it relies on Denmark for subsidies. But the US already has a very powerful military presence in Greenland. So what the French foreign minister means about attacking sovereign borders, it's a bit unclear. And he's also said that he doesn't believe that Trump would invade Greenland, but that of course the world is more insecure because we're facing a much more forceful Trump this time round than in previous administration.
Ilgin Kaladag, thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. The time is just nudging 7 minutes past midday here in London. You're listening to The Briefing with me, Emma Nelson. Time now for a look at the day's other news headlines. Here's Carlotta Rebello.
Thanks, Emma. South Korea's impeached president Yoon Suk-yeol has not fled his official residence, according to his lawyer. He added the president is prepared to stand trial if he is indicted or an arrest warrant is issued. The statement comes a day after a court granted an extension of a warrant to detain him. A state of emergency has been declared in California, with wildfires engulfing homes in the suburbs of Los Angeles. 3 massive wildfires are burning very close to densely populated areas, with more than 30,000 people ordered to evacuate. And researchers in Japan have developed technology that preserves the freshness of fruit and vegetables in the blink of an eye. Exposing produce to near-infrared light for a mere 0.1 of a second not only reduces mold and spoilage, but also helps cut food waste and pesticide use. Those are today's headlines. Back to you, Emma.
Thank you very much indeed, Carlotta. Now, the return of Donald Tusk to Polish politics was seen as a break from 8 years of hard populist government by the Law and Justice Party. With his liberal centrist civic platform promising the restoration of the rule of law and to improve human rights, there were high expectations that Poland would be restored to a pro-European, dynamic and open country. Well, a year on, and Prime Minister Tusk's popularity has plummeted. And why is that? So to tell us more, I'm joined now by Alex Szczerbiak, who's Professor of Politics at the University of Sussex and author of the Polish Politics blog. Good afternoon, Alex.
Good afternoon.
So what's gone wrong for Donald Tusk?
I think the problem is that he hasn't delivered on the promises that he made during the election campaign. His party, Civic Platform, had a programme which was called 100 specifics in 100 days. Okay, these were 100 policies they were going to introduce in 100 days in office. It's obviously been over a year, and fewer than half of those have even been partially implemented. In some areas, there were people who voted for the new government wanting very specific things to happen. In particular, a lot of young people turned out to vote because they wanted a liberalisation of Poland's abortion law. There hasn't been a liberalisation of Poland's abortion law, and those people are frustrated with the government. At the same time, I think there's been all kinds of economic challenges that the government's faced. In particular, prices have increased. The rate of inflation has gone up to one of the highest in Europe, and a lot of that is partly because the government has allowed energy prices to rise, which its predecessors had controlled. So I think that's the problem. I think that it came to office with very high expectations. It made a lot of promises of things it was going to do, and it simply hasn't done them. At the same time as the country has faced a lot of economic challenges, and people hold the government responsible for it.
Are there any reasons why some of these policies have not been implemented? Because on the surface of it, these are not concepts which require long-scale reform, are they?
Well, the government argues that they inherited a very problematic legacy from the Law and Justice predecessor, which obviously Law and Justice denies. But it also says that it specifically faces the problem, which is that the president, who is a Law and Justice supporter, has the power to veto legislation or to refer it to a body called the Constitutional Tribunal, which can strike it down. And the government doesn't have the 3/5 parliamentary majority that it needs to overturn a presidential veto, and that all the members of the Constitutional Tribunal, whose legitimacy, incidentally, the government doesn't recognise, were appointed by the previous governments. They were elected by parliaments dominated by Law and Justice. They also argue that because they're a very ideologically heterogeneous coalition, ranging through from some moderate social conservatives through to people on the social democratic left, that this has also prevented them, for example, getting through legislation on liberalising the abortion law. One of the junior coalition partners has voted against this. So the government argues that there's all kinds of reasons why they haven't been able to implement their programme, to do with the legacy that they inherited, the fact that they face a president who's hostile to them, and the fact that they are themselves a very ideologically diverse coalition, which means it's sometimes difficult to get things through Parliament.
Do we think that this was always going to be the case, that Donald Tusk coming back for a sort of a second bite at the cherry would never be as successful in his second term?
Well, and I think a lot of people say that, including people who are government supporters, and this accounts for why they're frustrated, is that this is actually being used as an excuse. They would point, for example, to the fact that the president has actually only vetoed 4 laws and referred another 4 to the Constitutional Tribunal, while allowing 100 to come through. As evidence of the fact that they're using the presidential veto as an excuse. In fact, it's very specific issues that the president has said that he will block legislation on things like what might call moral cultural issues, abortion, for example, or on attempts to reform the judiciary, which undermines the position of appointments that he has made, judges that he's appointed as a result of reforms introduced by the previous government. In terms of most of the government's socio-economic priorities, for example, the president doesn't appear to have made it obvious that he's going to block any of those. Indeed, a lot of the things the government's doing there, for example, continuing with generous welfare payments, are actually things that were introduced by the predecessor. So a lot of people argue that actually the government's just using this as an excuse. It's a pretext to explain the fact that it doesn't actually have a governing vision and a governing programme and a strategy, that all it had when it came to power was opposition to its Law and Justice predecessor. That's all that held it together, and that's all that's really is effectively the government's programme. And
is this criticism and lack of support directly targeted at Donald Tusk, or is it at Civic Platform as a whole? I mean, if we look back at June last year, the European parliamentary election was the first time that it had come out top in a national poll for a decade. So there was 6 months ago a certain amount of support for it. But given all the reasons that Civic Platform say that they haven't been able to do what they can, is this a more widespread dissatisfaction with the party itself?
Well, the problem is that while, as you correctly say, support for Civic Platform has gone up, last year it actually won. It got the largest share of the vote in a Polish national election for the first time in a decade. It didn't actually do that when it won the parliamentary election in 2023. And now it's actually ahead in the polls for the first time, and it has been for a year now, over Law and Justice. The problem is that the support for its junior governing coalition partners has fallen. In some cases, it's actually collapsed. It's a party called the Third Way, which was the key to the governing coalition's victory in the last election, was the fact that these parties, these junior coalition parties, particularly this party called the Third Way, a sort of eclectic, liberal, centrist, agrarian coalition, was able to pick up a lot of support, 14%. This is why they won the election. It wasn't because of Civic Platform. And although Civic Platform, a lot of the Civic Platform voters themselves are probably quite happy with what this government's doing. They don't mind a government whose main raison d'etre is to target its Law and Justice predecessor. A lot of people who voted for the junior coalition partners, thinking that they were actually voting for something different, a much more different approach to politics, are actually very disappointed. And if an election was held today, although Civic Platform would probably end up winning the most votes, because of the collapse in support for its junior partners, it would probably end up losing its majority in Parliament.
How much is there also to be considered the rise of, or the return to populism with the likes of Donald Trump coming back? And the fact that if Civic Platform and Donald Tusk are not doing well, the Law and Justice Party will seize an opportunity.
Yes, I mean, the Law and Justice Party were ecstatic when Donald Trump was elected. They saw him as a very close ideological ally, someone that they worked with very closely, a sort of a common enemy of the global liberal elites. I mean, they were actually some of them were wearing MAGA hats on the day after the election results were announced. And Civic Platform has had its leaders have a very problematic relationship with Donald Trump. Donald Tusk actually accused Donald Trump of being a Russian security service asset when he was speaking at a Civic Platform rally last year. So that is potentially a problem, because it means that Law and Justice can now say that, you know, the best way to have a good working relationship with a country which is, after all, our main military security ally, is to vote for Law and Justice, because we have a very good relationship with Donald Trump, whereas Civic Platform and Mr. Tusk don't. What Mr. Tusk will be hoping for is that actually the fact that there's this very close strategic partnership, geopolitical strategic partnership between the United States and Poland will override all of this, that Donald Trump will say, no, actually, you know, even the fact that I don't get on too well with Donald Tusk and I don't particularly like the Civic Platform government, the fact that Poland is such a key player on NATO's eastern flank, the fact that it spends so much on military security, I'm going to put that to one side because strategic cooperation is more important. And that's obviously what Mr. Tusk and the Civic Platform government will be hoping for.
Alex Scherbiak, thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. You're listening to The Briefing. And you're back with The Briefing with me, Emma Nelson. Now, the luxury travel market is an industry that's enjoyed rapid growth in the last few years, and Hilton's luxury brands are part of this. They experienced a record-breaking year last year with more than 500 properties now open across the world. Well, I caught up with Dino Michael, who's a Senior Vice President and Global Category Head Hilton Luxury Brands, to find out the secret to their success.
The desire for travel hasn't waned. I know we came out of the pandemic obviously with, you know, a lot of people wanting to travel and experience, make up for lost time. That really hasn't gone away, and I think we're seeing people really put travel at the top of their list above, you know, purchases, above possession. I think which is great. It's great to see that people are really taking travel, you know, to heart and making it about time with loved ones.
And how are you identifying that and turning it into what you do when you walk through the door of a Hilton?
Our focus is always going to be on service and culture. You know, anybody can build the right thing. You can spend enough money to build, you know, a great hotel, great room, great product. It's the service and the culture. And I think, you know, whether you're a Waldorf Astoria, a Conrad, whether you're an LXR, you know, across the board, I think that's where Hilton comes into its own. I think culture is something that's just key for us.
To bring that to life for us.
We've got the obvious things around, you know, Hilton winning best place to work. But I think beyond that, you think about our CEO, his philosophy, how that translates and permeates down. I think we're a very open, accessible company. We love longevity of tenure. And I think the industry itself, you know, is about the ability to travel and grow your career and visit and learn new countries, new languages, live and work in different places. I think it's one of the best industries to work in.
You undoubtedly, I don't think anybody in this building in Cannes will disagree with this being a great industry to work in. What about the people who you are trying to recruit or who you are trying to entice above your competitors, above other members of the market, to come and work at a Hilton, and not just to stay for the 3 months induction trial, but actually to stick it out and make a job of it, and not necessarily aspire to be a general manager, but to think, actually, I want to be the best receptionist in town?
I think we do a great job of talking about, the ecosystem in a hotel. It's not just about, a job on front desk or food and beverage. If you think about the career paths you could have in a hotel, right? You've got finance, marketing, food and beverage, front desk. You've got brand management. You've got operations. It's this huge matrix organization where your career could take an infinite number of paths, right? You could stay on property, go above property, go to corporate, you could work across Europe, Middle East, Africa, Asia Pacific, the Americas. So I think it's that ability to grow your career. I'm a great example. I was a classic immigrant, son of immigrants who went to law school, graduated as a lawyer.
And then went to Planet Hollywood.
Yeah.
Tell me, so you start off serving tables in Planet Hollywood, is that right? What did you learn then that you still wake up in the morning and think, Dino, remember when? Apply that to my job today.
We make people happy. We create memories. And I think at its core, and look, we're lucky. We've got Conrad Hilton's very famous, sentiment, to fill the earth with the light and warmth of hospitality. And if you break that down, just the ability to impact someone's night, evening, special occasion, celebration, we're a part of that.
There's something that is often a criticism or an observation, dare I say it, that's often made about Hilton, which is forever, Hilton is the one place that you'll get a good night's sleep, regardless as to where you are on planet Earth. The get me to a Hilton, it's going to be okay, is something that possibly has been said more than once. However, that makes you reliable, but it doesn't necessarily make you distinctive. How much do you struggle with that?
I talk about my mum a lot. If you ask my mum about Hilton, she's in her 70s and she can only ever say the Hilton. So if you go back at a certain period in time, the Hilton, everything happened at a Hilton, right? We were the international, in some ways, luxury brand before today's proliferation of luxury. We were the all-seeing, all-knowing, all-encompassing international brand, and anything that happened anywhere probably happened at a Hilton. I think that we've still got that foundation, we've still got that authenticity. And yes, we're big and our global reach is enormous. We have 24 brands.
That's a lot of brands.
That is a lot of brands.
Why do you need 24?
I think you're just satisfying, different types of stay, whether it's you're taking your kids to a football game or whether you're celebrating a milestone or whether you're just self-indulgent. Or we've got every stay occasion you could possibly want covered.
Your focus is very much on the luxury brand side of this, and you're going to be bringing in the pipeline of 50 properties that are going to come under your umbrella. Talk us through that.
So we've actually got 99, almost 100 across our 5 brands. That's okay.
Apologies for that.
No, we have Signia by Hilton, Nomad, which we recently partnered with Sodell, LXR, our collection brand, Conrad and Ward of Astoria. And this year's been, phenomenal in terms of where we've opened, in terms of Conrad in Orlando, a Ward of Astoria in the Seychelles, an LXR collection hotel in Waikiki. But if I look to the future, luxury is a long-term play. We plan and we look at opportunities years in advance. And I think, obviously, the big news next year will be the Ward of Astoria in New York coming back online after an 8-year restoration, which I think is a seminal moment for not just the brand but the company. Back in London at home in 2026 with the Ward of Astoria at the Admiralty Arch. So we've got some really amazing marquee locations coming up, and I think that's kind of testament to the efforts of so many people over so many years.
And this is part of a decades-long strategy, isn't it? If not longer. How do you plan in a world which is flipping on its head every 5 minutes?
Well, most of that is, if you think about our ownership structure, our owners are in it for the long term. So there's always going to be something going on in the world that affects, the microeconomies or certain regions. And luxury is it's a long-term play, it's a long-term hold. Our owners have a long-term vision. So I think for us, from inception, from conversation to construction to opening, could be anything from 5 to 7 years. So you have to almost discount what's currently going on in the world and look way past that.
Finally, what does the ILTM do for you? And we're surrounded by the big beasts. Every luxury name you can imagine is here. What is it that Hilton gets out of it?
Reconnecting is number one. I think there's a community, and not just within Hilton. I think if you think about the industry at large, so many of our leaders have come from other companies, and vice versa. So many of our leaders network for. So there's a networking effect that I think is probably the best of the best at this event.
You say that with a smile on your face.
Yeah,
how does it feel to be back at ILT?
I really look forward to it. It's just you see people that maybe you haven't seen for a year, at least a year, and it's as though you saw them yesterday, and you reconnect. And we're all busy, we're all traveling. I look forward to it so much every year, and I think you look at the genuine embrace around you. Everywhere you're looking, it's like an airport arrivals lounge. Everybody's hugging and reconnecting. And for us, it's about meaningfully collecting with our journalists that we've known for a while, travel agents that we've got long-standing relationships. It's part business, I think, part social, which is the beauty of it.
And that was Dino Michaels, Senior Vice President and Global Category Head at Hilton Luxury Brands, talking to me at the International Travel Market in Cannes. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. It is 16:26 in Dubai, which is where we head next to join Ewan Potts from Bloomberg for a roundup of the day's business stories. Very good afternoon to you, Ewan. How's Dubai looking?
Hello, Emma. Yeah, I have to say it's a little bit chilly today. When I popped out to the office this morning, I do start rather early. It was 16 degrees, which I wasn't ready for, I have to say.
Our hearts bleed. Tell us what's happening in the world where you are.
Well, I want to talk to you a little bit about what's going on in the markets today. There's a bond sell-off around the world. Yesterday saw a big sell-off in bonds around the world, and it's continuing today as well. And as is often the case with bond sell-off, the worry is inflation. And before everybody starts to panic that we're heading back to 2022 and that nasty inflation spike we saw, there's nothing like that on the cards. But there are signs that inflation is proving just a bit more sticky than investors hope, especially bond investors. If you hold a bond, inflation is your enemy. Of course, you have a fixed return. So anything which erodes the price of money, the value of money, is a real problem. And there are signs, yet again, that the US economy is doing very well. So we had some data out yesterday showing that the job market is motoring along. Vacancies in the US economy higher than expected. A number of jobs on offer higher than expected. So that is a good news for the labour market, and also the services sector motoring along very nicely. So that's all a bit of a worry when it comes to inflation. Of course, we have the threat of tariffs as well, which are inflationary. So bonds have been selling off. And when bonds sell off, that pushes their yield higher. So that means that it costs more to borrow money, which means it's more if you want to take out a mortgage or if you're a company wanting to borrow money. And of course, it's a problem for governments as well, who borrow huge amounts of money. And in the UK, 10-year bond yields are now at their highest level since 2008. And of course, we know that the UK government is looking to borrow more money. So that is an issue for the UK as well. So yeah, bond sell-off continuing. Also concerns it might bleed over into the stock market when bonds sell off, pushing yields rapidly higher. Often that can lead to a sell-off in stocks as well. So far, though, they've been pretty resilient.
Let's move on. Well, let's stay in the United Kingdom. A very large company is planning to list its shares in London. Tell us who it is.
So this is the fast fashion retailer Shein. It is a company which is planning to list in London. It's already filed for that listing. It's going to be potentially the biggest, in cash terms, the biggest listing in London's history. £50 billion is the possible value of this listing, but it's proving controversial. Now, the City of London desperately needs more business. It's still one of the world's two most important centres of financial services, but its stock exchange, which traces its history back to 1700, is really struggling. Companies in London trade at a much lower valuation than peers in New York, and as a result, a lot of firms are listing their shares elsewhere. Last year, listings in the UK slumped to 20th in the world, behind titans like Malaysia, Luxembourg, and Oman. So the market is really crying out for a blockbuster listing, and that is what Shein would be. But the problem is a lot of people, certainly on one side of politics, are not happy with how the company operates. The Americans have already said they don't want it listed in New York, and there are controversies over where it sources its products, or at least where its sellers source its products. They came up before the UK Parliament's Business and Trade Committee yesterday, and the chairman, Liam Byrne, there asked the company 10 times whether their cotton was sourced from China, and 10 times the company's representatives said that she didn't know. So MPs in the UK concerned about some of the controversies around Shein. The company itself says that it complies with all of the UK's laws, but a lot of people concerned about labour rights in some of its contractors, some of its sellers' factories.
Indeed, I mean the boss of LSEG, the London Stock Exchange Group, David Schwimmer, had to say, I think it was in August, he had to deny that LSEG was lowering its standards in order to get Shein to list. I mean, is there any truth in that accusation?
Well, it's a really tricky issue. The stock exchange has been trying to simplify some of its listing criteria. It wants to attract companies. You only have to go back 15 or 20 years. And London was really the obvious place for international firms to list. And we had companies coming from around the world. We had miners from South Africa and from Australia, and they would all head to London as kind of the global stock market. But because valuations are so much higher in New York now, the obvious place is to go to New York. This was really highlighted in the case of ARM, which is the big chip designer. They do a lot of designs for chips all around the world. They're based in Cambridge in the UK, and their listing wasn't in London. They decided to list on the NASDAQ in New York. So London has a real problem in attracting these companies, and it just doesn't have the draw that it used to have. So it needs to find ways of getting these big companies to list. And at the moment, Shein is the only big company which is heading towards London.
Ewan Potts, enjoy Dubai. Thank you so much for joining us on the line. That's all the time we have for today's edition of The Briefing. The warmest of thanks to my guests and also to the producer Tom Webb. Our researcher was Maisie Ringer. Our studio manager was Steph Chungu, with editing assistance from Elliot Greenfield. The Briefing's back tomorrow at the same time. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you very much for listening.